So delighted to be here today. I'm just marveling. Normally, when I give this talk, I have to explain to everyone what dry farming is, and it feels pretty amazing to be in a room of like 150 people who have all the background and are ready to dive in. Um, so today I'm going to be talking about nutrient depths from some trials that we did here on the Central Coast in California. Um, and we'll also be talking a little bit about inoculation. I know there's a question in the chat about that. So that was part of the study as well. We can go to the next slide. So just wanted to start with acknowledging all of the amazing people in the lab, the research team that I have here working with me have been absolutely incredible. And I think most importantly, all of the farmers who collaborated with me in this project. It's been a real group effort, and it's been such a privilege to get to sort of be part of this growing dry farm community on the Central Coast here. And of course, thanks to Western SARE for the funding that made this project possible. We can go to the next. Great. So just wanted to throw this up here in juxtaposition with the Oregon map, which I'm assuming is the context that folks here are more familiar with. So in California, you can see the coastal Oregon precipitation situation is probably similar to what you see in Northern California, up in the like blue and purple there. And I don't think that I can gesture with my pointer, so this will be sort of a geography lesson as well. But if you know where the San Francisco Bay is, you can see that it starts to get sort of yellow in that area. Perfect, thank you, Matt. And then actually where most of the trials that we did were one bay down, so in the Monterey Bay. And you can see, again, it's sort of in that yellow zone, which is areas that are like maybe pushing up against not even getting that 20 inches of rain that is sort of the set threshold for what makes dry farming possible. So pushing that lower end of irrigation or ability to farm with a lack of irrigation. And lots of the farmers in the study that I did actually do add some amount of supplemental irrigation at the very beginning of the season, especially I did this in 2021, which was a drought year. And so farmers needed to add some irrigation at the beginning of the season just to be able to get their crop going at all. And we can go to the next slide. So hopefully I don't need to really focus on this too much. You all know why we're dry farming here, but do just want to point out some particular things about this area of California that may or may not be true for y'all up in Oregon, which is that we have had some pretty extreme droughts in the past decade and are actually in the middle of another one. I know that we've been in the news recently for getting a ton of rain, but that sadly has not actually ended the drought that we have going on here right now. And so there's a lot of concern right now and a lot of interest building in the policy area as well, thinking about how we can farm with less water and also just thinking about how these techniques fit in with our groundwater system, which is also sort of in disarray, and would be happy to talk about that. But there's groundwater overdraft that's exacerbating all of our water problems here in California as well. Next slide. Great. So this is sort of similar to the suitability analysis that Lucas was showing earlier. This is a suitability map in California looking at precipitation and also temperature and soil type. So anywhere that's in blue on this map means that you get enough precipitation to dry farm, it's cool enough, and there's a high enough clay content in the soil that we think that dry farming would actually be possible. And then anywhere that's orange fits all of those constraints, but maybe doesn't get enough rain to always be able to successfully dry farm without any supplemental irrigation. And so the map on the left is just literally anywhere that fits those constraints. And of course, you see like a lot of the Sierra Nevada, according to that, would be great for dry farming. So the map on the right is both zoomed in on the study area that we were looking at and also is mapped so that we're only looking at cropland. And you can see that the Salinas Valley is that sort of orange spit that's coming out there and also happens to be in a critically overdrafted basin. So again, thinking about particularly in terms of sustainable groundwater management, how dry farming might be able to play a role in helping to get those basins sort of back in balance. All right, next slide. Great. So for this project, I started by just talking to all of the dry farmers that I could get to talk to me and asking them what would be interesting and helpful to know about dry farming. There's been, I think, in a lot of ways, the dry farm tomato system as we know it has been sort of pioneered at the Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food Systems, CASFIS, which is where that little pamphlet that Lucas was showing earlier came from. And so there's been a lot of the actual develop of the management technique around here, but not that much scientific research has gone into looking more closely at the system. So I think there's a lot of interest in farmers just to get some questions answered. And at the top of everyone's mind was, what depth of soil nutrients can plants actually access? And it's a super relevant question because as soils dry down, not only are plants not able to access water at the top of the soil profile, but also water is what helps mobilize nutrients and actually gets them into plant roots. So if the top chunk of the soil is dry, probably there aren't going to be very many roots there. And even if there are, nutrients are not going to be able to get to plant roots. So how deep do you have to go before plants can actually start meaningfully accessing the nutrients that they need to survive and thrive? And then a second question that a lot of folks asked was how soil fungal communities impact fruit quality and yields. And I, in my lab, study arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, which is a symbiotic fungus that can help plants tolerate water stress. So I'll talk a little bit about those results today, but I'm mainly going to be focusing on the nutrient depth side of the story. We can go to the next slide. So for this experiment, I was on 7 different fields. There were 6 farms, and one of them contributed 2 fields to the study. And was partly looking at inoculation. So we had this inoculation trial, and you can see I had all these plots laid out side by side, and one plot would be inoculated, one plot would be a control plot, so not inoculated, and had all these plots laid out on 7 different fields across the study area, which again was sort of in the Monterey Bay in California. And that's a picture of me inoculating a little baby tomato plant there. We can go to the next slide. And this is photos from all of the 7 different fields. I like to brag to my lab mates that I had an ocean view from every single field that I worked at that summer, which is fun bragging rights, and also I think is an important illustration just of the importance of the coastal influence on being able to farm in this climatic region. You really need that marine layer and coastal influence to keep temperatures cool enough and keep the air wet enough to make dry farming sort of feasible in this region. You can go next. So I collected nutrient data on phosphorus, ammonium, and nitrate at 4 different depths. It was 0 to 15 centimeters, 30 to 60 centimeters, 0 to 15, 15 to 30, 30 to 60, and 60 to 100. We can go to the next slide. And also had water, so gravimetric water content data and texture data for those depths as well. We can go to the next. And first, just wanted to take a quick tour of the yield and fruit quality that we were getting from these plots. I apologize for not having converted this to tons per acre or anything like that. This is so the y-axis here on the yield graph is the total marketable fruit at each harvest point for one plot, and each plot was 12 plants. So maybe not the easiest way to sort of get a global sense of what was going on, but you can at least compare these plots relative to each other and see that there was a really big spike probably around the 5th week of harvest, and then things leveled back out. And given the timing of when all these plots were planted, that tended to be sort of mid-August when the plants were at their peak. And then we also used percent dry mass. So it's sort of the opposite of the water content of a fruit. So this is the dry mass content of a fruit, and use that as a proxy for fruit quality. So sort of within a certain range, having a lower water content is better, a higher percent dry mass is better. And then of course you can get on the other side of that range where your fruits just sort of become rock hard and unpleasant to eat. So anything in that sort of 8 to 12% dry mass range seemed to be a sweet spot of high fruit quality. We can go to the next slide. So a little spoiler alert before I get into the full analysis results. the first thing I think is worth mentioning is that inoculation didn't do anything as far as we could tell. So this is, again, arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi inoculants. We found no difference in yields, whether plots were inoculated or not. And given that there is a cost associated with inoculating in the first place, you have to pay for the inoculum and you have to pay to actually apply it to the field. It seems to us like it's not worth it to try inoculating. Again, this is in a California context. Don't want to necessarily extrapolate too far to what might be happening in Oregon, but that was the results of our study here. And also found that nutrients only correlate with any fruit or yield metrics below 30 centimeters. So you have to get at least probably like over a foot down in the soil profile before any nutrient concentrations seem to matter at all. And we can go to the next slide. So for any of the sort of nerds out in the group, I was using Bayesian mixed models to try to figure out what the actual relationship was between these outcome variables, so yield or fruit quality, and the different nutrient depths that were involved in the study. And just for the sake of time, I won't talk about the results on the left here, but the results on the right, I think, have it spelled out in hopefully relatively easy to understand terms. So anything that's in a color means that there is a very statistically clear relationship between that variable and yield. And so notably, inoculation didn't have a clear relationship, and also plant spacing didn't have a clear relationship. And that's another theme in these results. I know someone was asking about it earlier. And so worth noting that in all of the fields that we studied, there was a range of spacing from 18 inches all the way up to 4 feet between plants. And anywhere in that range didn't seem to have any effect on yields or fruit quality. So that was something that surprised me and a fair amount of the farmers as well that we were working with. But it seems like plant spacing doesn't actually make that much of a difference in that range. And the sort of exciting things that we found were that nitrate and ammonium below 60 centimeters do correlate in a clear way with yields. And it actually looks like nitrate increases yields and ammonium decreases yields. And that was another thing that was surprising for me to see initially, was that you think about nitrogen being something that plants need to grow. And so it was a bit of a head scratcher to think about why ammonium would decrease yields at that depth. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So you can go to the next slide. So this is the exact same format of a figure, but this is looking at the blossom end rot incidence instead of the yield. So this is the proportion of fruits for each plot that were affected by blossom end rot. And again, we're finding that ammonium concentrations at the 30 to 60 centimeter depth actually increase blossom end rot. So the higher the ammonium level, the more blossom end rot that we're seeing in these plants. And so that partly explains the yield results that I was just showing on the previous slide. And also, after doing some more research, it seems like it is a known phenomenon that ammonium can inhibit calcium uptake. And so that could be part of the story of what's going on here. And another part of the story is that ammonium can actually decrease plants at high enough concentration, can decrease plants' ability to uptake water. So nitrate can actually help plants under drought stress, whereas ammonium can make plants even more drought stressed when there's limited water around. So could also explain why we're seeing this with blossom end rot and the yield results from the previous slide. And we can go to the final regression slide here. So this is looking at fruit quality and found that ammonium increases the percent dry weight, which again is not surprising if we sort of are working under this hypothesis that ammonium is maybe actually increasing plant water stress. It would make sense that the fruits are drier when plants are under more stress. And also that given that dry farming, sort of the point is to stress these tomatoes out, and that is part of what leads to the higher quality and better taste and everything, that actually there is maybe going to be an important balance to strike between having some level of ammonium in your soil where you might be trying to stress plants out a little bit, and this might be a good way to do it to increase fruit quality and really get that dry farm tomato that's particularly well known here. And also, I'm realizing I didn't say at the beginning that we were using early girl tomatoes, we were using whatever the farms were growing, and that tended to be early girl tomatoes. And then one farm had new girl tomatoes and another farm had dirty girl tomatoes of the farms that we looked at. And we can go to the next slide here. So just looking more closely at nitrogen here, I think it is worth noting that ammonium levels are pretty low down that deep. And just in general, it's really hard to manage nutrients that are down, 3 feet deep in the soil profile. So it doesn't take very much ammonium for these plants to actually show marked decreases in yield and also increases in blossom and rot. And then just looking at the nitrate to ammonium ratio, it looks like in general, yield the higher the nitrate and the lower the ammonium, the better yields are going to be. So that's what the graph on the right is showing here, and it's showing how it differed between each field. So also, I think an important note is that context always matters, and even just in these 7 fields across the study, you can see that there are different relationships between nutrients and yields. And we can go to the last slide here. And this is the final sort of research finding that I wanted to elaborate on here is that an important note of caution is that in California, at least, we have a threshold of 35 kilograms of nitrate per hectare. And if more nitrate than that gets into the groundwater, you're risking groundwater contamination with nitrates, which can be a really big public health concern. And so 3 of the fields that we were at seem to have nitrate levels at harvest that were above that nitrate concentration. So to the extent that these results are saying, increase nitrate levels deep in the soil profile, and that'll increase yields, just want to note that there's certainly a limit to how much you want to try to increase your nitrate levels due to environmental and public health potential concerns. We can go to the last slide here. So just wanted to summarize everything and say that it seems like an important part of dry farming, which we already knew, and this is just confirming, is that as a dry farmer, you have to target a balance between yield and quality. And so we're seeing that with the ammonium versus nitrate balance here. And yeah, I think it's one of the big questions of dry farming is how do you get that dry farm quality without sacrificing yields too much. It looks like only nutrients below 30 centimeters are having any effect on fruit yields and quality. And for the most part with yields, that's happening actually below 60 centimeters, which raises interesting questions about how do you actually start to manage nutrients below 60 centimeters. And like I was saying before, lower nitrate and higher ammonium leads to better fruit quality, but higher nitrate and lower ammonium leads to better or higher yields. And that just means that we also have to look out for potential groundwater contamination. And of course, avoid mycorrhizal inoculants, at least from a profitability standpoint, we can't find that they actually do anything meaningful. And there are other results from the fungal community that I'd be happy to talk about with folks if you're curious about that side of the project as well. So I will stop here. I know that I'm going over time and we want to have a break, but I'll take any questions if there's time, and otherwise I can see you in the breakout session for more conversation.